Welcome to our channel, where history hides the darkest secrets. Today's story is not for the faint of heart. It's about love twisted into obsession, power without mercy, and a teenage boy forced to become an emperor's ghost. This is the story of how Nero turned a young boy into the image of his dead wife. The imperial guards found him hidden deep inside a dusty wine cellar. He clutched a small vial of poison, his hands shaking with fear. This wasn't a rebel or a criminal trying to escape justice. This was Sporus, barely 20 years old, once called the Empress of Rome. He was ready to die, choosing poison over the horror that awaited him in the arena. But to understand why death seemed like the kinder choice, we need to go back 3 years to a moment of madness and obsession. It all began when a grieving, unstable emperor looked at a teenage boy and saw the ghost of his dead wife staring back. This isn't just another Roman scandal full of decadence. It's one of the darkest stories of identity ever told. A twisted case where a life wasn't stolen for money or power, but erased and rewritten piece by piece in the name of love and control. And what's most chilling, all of it comes straight from official Roman records. Rome 65 AD, the empire is vast, the emperor unstoppable. And on this day, Nero has just crossed a line even Rome wasn't prepared for. He didn't order a battlefield slaughter or execute a rival politician. This time, Nero murdered with his bare hands, in the privacy of his own chambers. The victim, his pregnant wife, Poppaea Sabina. Some say he delivered one brutal kick to her belly. Others describe a violent outburst, blows so fierce she collapsed bleeding onto cold marble. Only then, as the rage drained from him, did Nero panic. He screamed for doctors, he begged for help. But not even an emperor can bring back the dead. And Poppaea wasn't just a beautiful empress. She was Nero's obsession, his muse, his mirror. The only person who ever made him feel like a god among mortals. Writers of the time say she had an almost unearthly beauty. Her hair shone like gold threads in sunlight. Her skin was pale and glowing, and her large, soft eyes reminded poets of the goddess Venus herself. But Nero's grief wasn't like any ordinary grief. He didn't weep like a broken man. He raged like a god betrayed. He saw her death not as tragedy, but as a cosmic insult. To lose Poppaea was to be challenged by the universe itself, and Nero didn't take that challenge lightly. Even Rome's most hardened elites were disturbed by what came next. Nero refused to cremate her like tradition demanded. Instead, he had her embalmed using mountains of rare spices, more than what Arabia could produce in a year. He dressed her body in royal robes and sealed her in a crystal coffin displayed where he could still see her. Servants whispered that Nero spoke to her corpse. He'd dine beside her, ask her advice, pretend she was still alive. Physicians warned that grief was twisting his mind. But Nero wasn't just grieving, he was unraveling. He drank stronger and stronger poppy wine just to sleep. Still, he'd wake screaming her name, convinced she was calling from the next room. Food disgusted him, unless it was prepared exactly how she liked it. He ordered her bedroom preserved untouched. Even her hairbrush had to stay in the exact spot she left it. But the most disturbing change came 2 months later. Nero began seeing Poppaea's face everywhere, in the winemaid's glance, in a senator's wife across the Colosseum, in the brothels of the city. He was chasing a ghost, and he was ready to recreate her, no matter what it took. In the weeks that followed, Nero's obsession only grew stronger. He would freeze in the middle of state meetings, eyes locked on a passing servant girl, a noblewoman, even a child. Anyone who showed even the faintest resemblance to Poppaea. He'd grab their faces without warning, tilt their heads into the light, searching desperately for something that wasn't there. The palace staff tiptoed through their days, hoping the emperor's madness would pass, but it didn't. It got worse. Nero demanded hundreds of portraits and sculptures of Poppaea, but he didn't just want her face, he wanted her soul. And when artists failed to capture it, as they always did, Nero exploded in fury. Sometimes he ordered the artist beaten. Other times he broke down crying like a grieving child. Then came a day that changed everything. It was late in the year 65 AD. Nero had forced himself to attend a dull administrative review, trying to distract his mind from grief. A young palace servant recently promoted was brought forward for approval. He was maybe 15 years old. And when Nero looked up, time stopped. The boy had her eyes. Not similar, not close. The exact same large, dark, dewy eyes that once belonged to Poppaea. Same soft cheekbones. Same nervous tilt of the head. Even the same golden shimmer in the eyes when the light hit just right. Nero stood up so fast that scrolls flew off his lap. The entire court went silent. He walked straight to the boy, circling him slowly, eyes wild with something deeper than lust. It was hope. "What's your name?" Nero asked, barely audible. The boy bowed his head. "I am Sporus Divine Augustus." And here's where most Roman historians miss the point. Sporus was not just a common slave. He had grown up inside the palace itself. His mother was a foreign captive who died giving birth. He'd been raised among educated servants, taught Latin, Greek math, even public speaking. He was being trained for desk work, not manual labor. But none of that mattered now. In Nero's mind, Sporus was no longer a person. He was a mirror, a chance to bring Poppaea back from the dead. Nero circled him like an artist inspecting a statue. He touched Sporus's face, tilted his jaw, ran his fingers through the boy's soft hair. Witnesses said it lasted only minutes, but to Sporus it felt like forever. He stood perfectly still, aware that his life hung by a thread, but not yet realizing the true nightmare that had begun. Then Nero smiled, a cold, triumphant smile. One historian later called it the smile of a man who believes he has defeated death. Nero turned to his guards. "Cancel today's meetings. Call my physicians. Prepare the best rooms and their sharpest tools. We begin immediately." But the knives didn't come right away. Before the surgeries began, Nero needed time to study Sporus, to plan out how this boy would become the perfect reflection of his lost queen. Piece by piece, for days, Sporus was kept in a grand room, right next to the emperor's private chambers. But this wasn't luxury. It was a prison wrapped in silk. Each day he was poked, measured, examined. Artists were brought in, the same ones who once painted Poppaea. They studied Sporus like a living statue, sketching comparisons between him and the dead empress, where he matched her, where he didn't, and how he could be changed. Nero studied their drawings like sacred scrolls. He scribbled notes in the margins, obsessed with shaping Sporus like clay. But it wasn't just his face Nero wanted to change. He began training Sporus to become Poppaea in every way. He listened closely to the boy's voice, correcting how he spoke, teaching him Poppaea's slow, graceful way of pronouncing vowels. He made Sporus walk across the room over and over, sit a certain way, hold his hands just like she once did. Every tiny difference was noticed and punished. Sporus was no longer allowed to use his own name. From that moment on, servants had to call him lady or mistress. His boyish tunics were taken away, replaced with flowing gowns, dyed in Poppaea's favorite colors. He was taught how to paint his face, not like a Roman youth, but like a royal bride. Heavy makeup, perfumed oils, gold dust around the eyes. Each morning, he would stare into the bronze mirror and see less and less of himself. Bit by bit, his identity was being erased. Servants later whispered, "That Sporus moved like someone trapped in a nightmare." He barely ate. He barely spoke. But he didn't resist. How could he? He knew what would happen if he disobeyed. Because by now he knew everything. Nero wasn't hiding his plan. He talked about it openly, proudly, like a mad sculptor describing his masterpiece. He had called in the palace doctors, explained exactly what he wanted. Sporus would be changed permanently, not just castrated like a eunuch. That was common enough. But this was unheard of. Nero wanted to build a woman, to reshape Sporus's body into a new version of Poppaea. The physicians were terrified, but they had no choice. refuse and die, succeed and be showered with wealth. They began designing surgeries far beyond anything Rome had seen. The night before the operation, Nero entered Sporus's chamber with a wooden box. Inside it was Pompeia's wedding ring, a huge emerald surrounded by pearls. He slid it onto Sporus's finger. It was too big, but that didn't matter. Tomorrow, Nero whispered, you will be reborn. You will become who you were always meant to be. And I will love you as I loved her. For the first time in days, Sporus spoke. His voice was faint trembling. Will it hurt? For just a moment. Something human flickered in Nero's eyes, but it vanished, replaced by madness. Birth always hurts, he said. But what comes after is beautiful. The surgery took place in a sealed chamber in the palace's medical wing. The exact details have been lost to time, but what little we do know is horrifying. It lasted for hours. Screams echoed down the marble corridors. One servant said the cries could be heard 3 hallways away, even through the thickest walls. Outside, Nero paced like a father in a maternity ward, shouting encouragement through the door, as if words could stop the pain. Recovery was slow, dangerous. There were no antibiotics, no painkillers beyond poppy extract. Sporus had to relearn how to move, how to walk, how to live in this new unnatural body. And through it all, Nero never left his side. He gave orders to the doctors, adjusted pain medicine, even helped change the bandages himself. To some, it might seem like love, but it wasn't. It was control. Nero wasn't healing a person. He was finishing a project, and every gentle touch came with a silent message. You are no longer Sporus. You are Poppaea now. He read to him from Poppaea's favorite poems, told stories of her past, memories Sporus had never lived, but was expected to remember day by day. The line between who Sporus was and who Nero wanted him to be began to disappear. Healing the body was just the beginning. The true challenge was reshaping his identity. Soon a wave of tutors arrived to transform him. They taught Sporus how to move like a Roman noblewoman. His steps had to be shorter, more graceful. Even his hands were retrained to handle objects with delicacy. He learned how to hold a cup, how to wave while speaking. His voice lessons were even more intense. Every day he practiced sounding softer, higher. They trained him to speak in Pompeia's unique tone. He had to copy how she laughed, how she spoke to others. A full wardrobe was created just for him. These weren't random clothes, but exact copies of Pompeia's dresses. Tailors studied her outfits to remake them in Sporus's size. Even her old jewelry was resized to fit his fingers and ears. The palace perfumers mixed oils to match her scent. But the transformation wasn't only about how he looked. He had to master the life of a Roman highborn woman. This meant hours of morning beauty rituals and styled hair. He practiced how to lie at dinner parties like a noble. They taught him how to speak just clever enough to impress. Still, it grew darker from there. Nero didn't just want a copy of Pompeia. He wanted Sporus to fully become her. The boy had to study every detail of Pompeia's past. He learned about her hometown, her childhood and first marriage. He memorized her tastes in food books and politics. When Nero talked about memories with her, Sporus had to pretend to remember. 6 months after surgery came the first public event. It was a private dinner with Nero's closest allies and their wives. When Sporus entered, wearing one of Pompeia's old gowns, jaws dropped. The room fell silent as everyone stared. People had heard the rumors, but seeing him made it real. In the dim light, he looked shockingly like the late empress. His smile, his posture, his walk, everything was copied perfectly. For moments it felt like Pompeia had returned. Even experienced courtiers forgot it was all an illusion. Nero was proud, standing beside Sporus like a sculptor with his statue. He introduced him as Sabina Pompeia's family name. Guests, knowing how to survive in politics, played along enthusiastically. They complimented Sabina's looks, joked with her, and acted as if nothing was odd. But behind the masks, not everyone was convinced. Historian Tacitus wrote about those who noticed the truth. Some guests saw that Sporus's hands were still too large. His shoulders seemed too wide under the gown's fabric. Sometimes, his real voice slipped through the rehearsed softness. Worse were the moments when Sporus's own self broke through. Witnesses described a sharp mind, quiet humor, and deep sadness. But any sign of the real Sporus was quickly shut down. He couldn't break character without consequences. Nero didn't beat him. Bruises would spoil the illusion. Instead, he used silence threats and emotional withdrawal. He'd tell Sporus he would find someone better if needed. Then came the most shocking twist of all. Nero declared he would marry Sporus. This wasn't a joke or private affair. It was official. In 67 AD, Rome learned its emperor would wed his feminized companion, and the wedding would follow every proper Roman tradition. Officials planned it as they would any imperial marriage. Priests arranged offerings and nobles received formal invitations. No one dared refuse. On the big day, Sporus wore a bride's yellow veil. His face was painted with ceremonial makeup. A vast dowry was transferred, including gold and land. Marriage documents were signed with the standard legal wording. Even though they could never produce children, Nero acted like a true groom. He said his vows, performed the rituals, and carried Sporus over the threshold. Then came a celebration of unimaginable luxury. Birds stuffed with other birds were served to guests. Rare wines flowed from the emperor's own collection. Dancers and musicians entertained the elite of Rome. And still the show went on. The Roman nobility kept smiling. They bowed, they congratulated, they clapped. Costly gifts flooded into the palace. Jewels for the new empress. Silken sheets, gold goblets, household treasures. Some even sent fertility charms. Was it cruel mockery, or just fear masked as loyalty? Senators gave speeches full of praise. Poets wrote wedding verses by command. They called it a beautiful union. But behind those polished words, everyone knew the truth in silence. This wasn't just madness anymore. It felt like a moral collapse. A deep wound in Roman identity. The crowd didn't dare speak it. But their eyes gave it away. They were watching a nightmare unfold. Still they smiled, because silence meant safety. To disagree was to invite death. If this story feels unsettling to you, tell me your thoughts in the comments. Have you heard this before? And don't forget to subscribe. This isn't in your history textbook. Back in the palace, Sporus endured. Every day began the same way. He awoke in Poia's old chambers. Her belongings filled every corner again. Servants, who once dressed the empress, now brushed powder onto a boy. They combed his hair just so. They painted lips, tied jeweled sandals. Every detail had to be perfect. There was no room for error. Every smile had to be hers. Every glance had to feel familiar. Public appearances were the hardest moments. Nero dragged him to every event. The theater, the races, the forums. Sporus sat beside him, silent, smiling. In Poia's clothes in Poia's place. The people stared with disbelief and awe. A ghost reborn through pain and makeup. A teenage boy pretending to be history. And the crowds just played along. When Nero toured Greece in 67, the performance turned into full theater. Greek officials bowed before Sporus too. They called him empress, praised his grace. He attended banquets, stood beside altars. He became part of imperial prayers. Priests asked the gods for children, ignoring the bitter impossibility beneath it. But behind the costumes and titles, the real horror waited in silence, in the privacy of their chambers. The illusion could never break down. Nero didn't just want obedience. He wanted resurrection word for word. Sporus had to respond like Poia. He had to remember things he never lived. He mimicked her whispers, her sighs, even her little secrets and laughter. Nero clung to the illusion desperately. And when Sporus slipped even slightly, the punishment wasn't always violent rage. Worse was Nero's cold disappointment. That frozen look could shatter someone. And for Sporus, that meant danger. He had no power of refusal. His survival depended on performance. In the palace, he was feared. Servants avoided his eyes and footsteps. They didn't know what to call him. Not slave, not prince, not woman. He stood between all identities nowhere. He was alive but not himself. They whispered stories behind closed doors of finding him alone in gardens, just standing unmoving in morning light, like he had forgotten who he was, or how to be anything at all. Of course Sporus tried to escape. Who wouldn't try to run? But where could he truly go? Everyone in Rome knew his face. His look was too distinct. The imperial jewelry gave him away. Even his walk had changed. His body spoke the lie aloud. There was no way to blend in. One escape was recorded in history, but it ended in brutal failure. Those who helped him were caught. Nero made sure their deaths were public. They were nailed to crosses outside, right in view of Sporus's window. A clear message written in blood. Don't even think about freedom. Yet what broke him wasn't punishment. It was the moments of false warmth. Because sometimes Nero seemed truly gentle. He brought gifts and whispered softly. He protected Sporus from petty insults. He seemed to believe it was love. To outsiders, it almost looked romantic. But how can love exist like this? When one soul is rewritten by force. When one body is carved to fit fantasy. Nero didn't love Sporus, he loved a ghost. Historians now think Sporus fractured mentally. His mind had to protect itself. He began calling himself Poa always. Even when Nero wasn't around, servants caught him speaking to mirrors, using both voices, his and hers. He played both parts in conversation. Reality and performance had merged together, not acting anymore, just surviving as two. Then came spring of 68 AD. Nero's empire began to break. Revolts rose across distant provinces. The Senate turned against their emperor. Even the Praetorian Guard abandoned him. But Sporus stayed, never leaving his side. He fled Rome with the Mad King. Together, they hid in a villa, and madness took over everything. Nero wept, rage begged, sang, 1 minute planning escape by sea, the next staging his own funeral. But through it all, Sporus performed. He held his role to the end, the ever-loyal, silent painted bride. Witnesses described Nero clinging to him, calling him his only love, his living resurrection of Poia. He begged Sporus to die with him, to become a tragic legend together. When the enemy finally closed in, Nero chose death over capture. But the theater didn't stop there. He asked for ritual mourning, a final act of performance art. He wanted Poa to weep for him, so Sporus became her once again. He helped guide the fatal dagger, and in doing so perhaps showed mercy. With Nero gone, freedom should have followed. But Sporus remained trapped in memory. Now he was a relic of shame, a breathing reminder of madness. The new rulers saw him differently. Some viewed him as a strange treasure. Others saw a cursed symbol of the past. To Galba, the next emperor, Sporus was neither threat nor friend. He was kept inside the palace, but barely acknowledged or spoken to. Sporus existed like a fading echo, still dressed as a woman, still trapped in a role never chosen, still caught between life and illusion. What choices were left to him after so many years of reshaping? They still called him Sabina, but Nero's obsession was gone. Galba didn't care much either, and within 7 months, he was dead. Killed in public, his rule ended in violence. Then came Otho, Nero's old rival. And Otho once loved the real Poia. Before Nero stole her from him, she had been Otho's wife. So when Otho looked at Sporus, what did he really see? Was it revenge he wanted, or the ghost of a stolen love? Historical records hint at something unsettling. Otho treated Sporus like a real widow. He even spoke of marrying him, a twisted echo of lost time. But the throne slipped away fast. Otho died by suicide after losing a battle, and Sporus was handed to the victor, a man named Vitellius. And under Vitellius, Sporus's story turned truly nightmarish. Vitellius was not like Nero or Otho. He had no refined cruelty, just raw appetite. He didn't see Sporus as human, or even as a trophy of power. To him, Sporus was entertainment, a plaything for the Roman mob. And then came the cruelest idea yet a public spectacle in the arena. Sporus would not sit in the royal box. He would be the show itself. The plan was pure horror. He'd play Proserpina, a goddess from myth. In the tale, she's dragged to hell, abducted by Pluto, god of the underworld. But Vitellius wanted to reenact this myth with Sporus as the maiden. Dressed in costume, he would be chased by demons, captured, violated, and finally killed before a crowd. It was a death by humiliation, a final erasure of dignity. But Sporus found something at last, the courage to say no. Instead of becoming the Empire's joke, he took his life into his own hands. Some say he drank poison. Others say he cut his veins. But every account agrees on one thing: he chose death himself. At just 20 years old, he finally stopped the performance. His story forces us to ask hard questions about control, identity, and cruelty. Here was a person broken on purpose, remade to serve someone else's fantasy. His body changed, his voice stolen, his self buried, forced to wear another's face to act out someone else's grief. And the real Sporus, we'll never truly know him. We don't know what he loved, what made him laugh or cry. We don't even know his real name. Sporus may have been a cruel nickname, a word meaning seed, or something sown hinting at what was done to him. The boy who met Nero that day was erased forever. What remained was a shell, a character trapped in someone else's play. Some historians believe his final act was his only moment of true freedom. Others point to earlier signs, small acts of resistance, helping Nero end his own life, trying to flee the palace, even speaking in two voices, letting the truth slip through the cracks. But maybe the worst part of all was how many people let it happen. Doctors who did the surgery, teachers who trained him in womanhood, servants who dressed him daily, courtiers who smiled and played along. Each one chose safety over decency. Each one ignored the humanity of a boy. Sporus' story reminds us of something: dark power without morality destroys everything. When fantasy replaces truth and humans become props. When society plays along to survive, we get tragedies like this. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to hear more truths hidden in the cracks of history, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. In the long scroll of Roman history, Sporus is often just a footnote, just another tale of Nero's madness. But he was more than that. He was a real person, one who suffered, endured, and resisted, someone whose life was stolen, whose body was used, whose voice was taken away. He deserves more than pity. He deserves to be remembered for his strength, for his final stand. The ruins of Nero's palace still remain buried deep beneath modern Rome. Somewhere beneath those stones, Sporus walked the halls of his stolen life, practiced speaking in a false voice, stared into mirrors that lied back, and those stones still remember, even if the world has forgotten. They remember the boy who became a ghost,